Admiral Zex Tholian's mandibles click nervously as his stealth shuttle breaches Earth's atmosphere. The 7-foot insectoid commander of the Galactic Hegemony's 12th subjugation fleet has conquered 17 worlds, but something about this Earth triggers his ancestral warning instincts. Initial scans had classified humans as a Level 2 civilization, barely achieving rudimentary spaceflight, making them ripe for standard conquest protocols. Atmospheric composition within acceptable parameters, his onboard AI reports as the shuttle descends through cloud cover. Local population density suggests minimal detection risk. Zex Tholian adjusts his exoskeleton's thermal regulation. Earth's gravity pulls uncomfortably at his frame, heavier than his homeworld of Plastch. The High Council's orders had been explicit. Conduct first-hand reconnaissance before committing the Armada. The Admiral had protested. Sending the fleet's commander on a simple observation mission was inefficient, but their reasoning proved sound once he reviewed the intelligence anomalies. Humans advanced from primitive agriculture to splitting the atom in less than 10,000 years. The developmental timeline defied all known evolutionary models. Most species required millions of years to achieve comparable technological progress. Display target acquisition zone. Zex Tholian commands, his multifaceted eyes scanning the holographic projection. The shuttle's sensors have identified an optimal observation subject, a juvenile human in a low population density area called Colorado. The mountainous terrain provides natural cover for his operations while limiting potential witnesses. The shuttle lands silently in a wooded clearing. Activating his personal cloaking field, Zex Tholian feels the familiar tingle as light bends around his chitinous form, rendering him invisible to primitive human detection methods. His specialized atmospheric filter processes the oxygen-rich air into compounds his respiratory system can tolerate. Begin recording. He subvocalizes to his neural implant. Preliminary observation of subject species 7294C. Designation humans. Local solar cycle 3.29, 2025. The Admiral moves with practiced silence through the underbrush. His species evolved as apex predators before developing civilization, and those instincts serve him well now. Within minutes, he reaches the edge of a cleared area containing a modest human dwelling structure. In the open space behind the dwelling, his compound eyes focus on a small figure, 8-year-old Maya Rodriguez. She hums a melodic pattern while assembling scavenged wooden materials. Her dark hair is secured in what his cultural database identifies as a ponytail, and her clothing suggests standard juvenile attire for this region. Subject appears to be constructing a primitive elevated shelter using naturally occurring materials, Zex Tholian notes, demonstrating basic tool usage and spatial reasoning. He observes as Maya consults a crude drawing on flattened wood pulp. Paper, his database supplies, then measures a wooden beam against another with surprising precision. When the pieces don't align, she doesn't discard them as his species would. Instead, she modifies the larger beam using a simple cutting tool. Problem-solving behavior noted, Zex Tholian records. Subject demonstrates adaptation rather than resource abandonment. A communication device chimes from within Maya's pocket. She extracts it, engages in brief verbal exchange, then returns to her task with renewed focus. The Admiral's translator captures fragments. Dinner, homework, just one more hour. Zex Tholian settles into a concealed position. Standard observation protocols require 72 hours of continuous monitoring to establish behavioral baselines. As Maya continues her methodical construction, occasionally consulting reference materials on her small digital device, the Admiral finds himself unexpectedly intrigued. Preliminary assessment. He records, juvenile subject displays resource utilization and construction methodology, consistent with Level 2 technological capability. However, information acquisition behavior suggests developmental acceleration beyond expected parameters. As the sun begins to set, Maya reluctantly gathers her tools. Before leaving, she stands back, evaluating her progress with a critical eye. The incomplete structure shows clear evidence of deliberate design, not random assembly. She nods once, satisfied, then speaks to herself. Tomorrow, I'll make it even better. The simple declaration sends an inexplicable sensation along Zexfolian's nerve clusters. In 17 planetary conquests, he had never encountered a species so casually confident about improvement. Most accepted their limitations. Humans, it seemed, did not. Zexfolian establishes his observation blind within a dense copse of pine trees overlooking the Rodriguez residence. 3 standard cycles have passed since his arrival, and the Admiral finds his scientific detachment increasingly difficult to maintain. His surveillance equipment, technology 5 centuries beyond Earth's most advanced systems, tracks Maya's every movement with molecular precision. Subject maintains consistent sleep activity patterns. He notes in his official log, approximately 9 hours of unconsciousness followed by 15 hours of varied activity. Such inefficient biological programming would never survive natural selection on his homeworld, where predatory pressure demands near-constant vigilance. The morning ritual fascinates him most. Maya consumes nutrition, breakfast, his cultural database supplies, while simultaneously absorbing information from multiple sources: a digital tablet displaying current events, a paper book propped against a container, and verbal exchanges with adult caregivers. Multisensory input processing during nutritional intake, a cognitive efficiency his species achieved only after neural augmentation became standard. She's simultaneously learning 3 separate subjects. He subvocalizes to his recorder, without apparent mental compartmentalization training. Today marks the 4th consecutive day of Maya's attendance at the Knowledge Distribution Center humans call school. Zexfolian dispatches a thumbnail-sized drone to follow her, its feed projecting directly into his optical centers. Unlike the genetically determined education pods of the hegemony, human knowledge transfer appears chaotic and democratized. Information flows freely between instructors and juveniles, with frequent bidirectional questioning. Most disturbing, he notes when Maya's class engages in mathematical problem-solving. Subjects are not merely taught solutions but methodology for discovering new solutions independently. When Maya returns home, she immediately resumes work on her arboreal platform. Yesterday's thunderstorm had collapsed her 3rd attempt, scattering materials across the yard. The Admiral had expected abandoned pursuit, the natural response his species would have to repeated failure. The hegemony educational protocols explicitly teach efficiency through abandonment of unproductive endeavors. Instead, Maya studies the collapsed structure with methodical attention. She produces a small bound paper collection, notebook, and makes detailed sketches of the failure points. Zexfolian zooms his visual enhancers to capture her surprisingly sophisticated notations. Water weight equals structural weakening, and diagonal support beams needed. Subject demonstrates scientific methodology without formal training. He records, mandibles twitching with the first stirrings of genuine concern. Observation, hypothesis formation, experimental design modification. As darkness falls, Maya reluctantly abandons her reconstruction efforts. Zexfolian expects the typical juvenile behavior patterns his species considers universal: recreational activity followed by biological shutdown. Instead, his observation drone captures Maya secretly accessing her communication device beneath sleeping coverings, the blue light illuminating her determined expression. His translator software processes the data on her screen. Advanced treehouse engineering, load-bearing calculations for wooden structures, weatherproofing techniques. Subject is self-educating beyond designated knowledge level. He notes an uncomfortable sensation spreading through his thoracic segments. On his homeworld, accessing information beyond one's assigned development stage carried severe consequences. The hegemony controlled knowledge dissemination precisely to prevent unpredictable innovation. Humans apparently recognize no such boundaries. The following morning brings unexpected atmospheric precipitation. Most juvenile subjects in his previous planetary studies would delay construction projects. Maya emerges wearing protective coverings, her expression set with what his emotional recognition software identifies as determination. She has adapted her materials, covering exposed wood with waterproof sheeting obtained from the dwelling's waste repository, repurposing discarded materials for new applications. Zexfolian's appendage unconsciously touches the ceremonial scar, marking his elevation to Admiral, awarded after 2 centuries of distinguished service and rigorous adherence to established protocols. This human child, barely 8 cycles old, casually demonstrates adaptive problem-solving that would qualify her for officer training in his civilization. Adaptability anomaly confirmed. He records, mandibles clicking with growing agitation. Subject treats established limitations as temporary obstacles rather than fixed boundaries. Implications for conquest protocols require urgent reassessment. The phase shifter activates with a soft hum against Zexfolian's carapace, bending light around his imposing form. The technology represents the pinnacle of hegemony stealth engineering, undetectable by civilizations lacking quantum resonance scanners. Inside Maya's elementary school, the Admiral positions himself in the upper corner of the classroom, multifaceted eyes adjusting to the artificial illumination. Subject environment analysis complete. He subvocalizes to his neural recorder. 24 juveniles arranged in 4x6 grid formation. Single adult authority figure designated Ms. Bennett, according to identification marker. Primitive knowledge display surfaces throughout enclosure. The room contains artifacts that confound the Admiral's understanding of information hierarchy. Historical timelines, mathematical formulas, and biological diagrams adorn the walls. Unrestricted knowledge accessible to all occupants regardless of status. In hegemony education chambers, information appears only when genetically authorized individuals request specific data. Today we're continuing our history unit on how conflict shapes innovation. The instructor announces. The words freeze the Admiral's hemolymph mid-circulation. His translator must be malfunctioning. No species would deliberately expose juveniles to the evolutionary mechanisms of their development. Such metacognitive awareness typically required centuries of philosophical advancement. The instructor activates a primitive display system. Images materialize showing human conflict progression, from simple clubs to mechanized warfare to atomic weapons. The juveniles show no signs of distress at viewing their species' capacity for destruction. Instead, they appear engaged, curious. Who can tell me how World War II changed technology? Ms. Bennett asks. Maya's hand rises instantly. Radar was improved to spot enemy planes. Computers were invented to break codes. Rockets were developed that later helped us reach space. Medicine advanced because doctors had to help so many wounded soldiers. Excellent observation about the connection between military necessity and civilian benefits. Maya. Zexfolian's appendages tremble slightly. The child has articulated the precise pattern his own civilization's historians took millennia to identify. That existential threats accelerate development exponentially. More disturbing, the knowledge is being freely distributed rather than restricted to military leadership castes. The instructor changes the display to show primitive spacecraft. The space race happened because America and the Soviet Union were competing. Each country pushed the other to innovate faster. Who thinks competition helps humans develop new technology? 20 juvenile hands rise in unison. The Admiral's threat assessment algorithms begin calculating revised conquest timelines. Your assignment, Ms. Bennett continues, is to imagine how humanity might defend against a hostile alien invasion with our current technology. Zexfolian nearly deactivates his phase shifter in shock. The hypothetical scenario precisely matches the hegemony's actual intentions. His anterior limbs instinctively reach for his emergency beacon before military discipline reasserts control. Maya's hand shoots up first. Ms. Bennett, I think we shouldn't just think about our current technology. History shows we develop fastest when threatened. The Admiral's optical sensors focus intensely on the child. The aliens might arrive facing one level of technology, she continues, her expression animated, but within months would face something completely different. If aliens attacked, Every scientist on Earth would work together. We'd study any alien technology we captured and learn from it. Other juveniles filled enthusiastically on Maya's assessment, proposing adaptation strategies with disturbing accuracy. One suggests reverse engineering captured alien vessels. Another hypothesizes electromagnetic countermeasures against advanced navigation systems. The third proposes biological warfare tailored to alien physiology. These untrained children casually discussed resistance concepts that align with actual hegemony vulnerability points. Zextholian accesses his secure quantum communicator, transmitting an encrypted emergency message to the fleet. Priority Alpha. Delay invasion preparations. Enome LYDT. He adds the classification code reserved for civilizations requiring special containment protocols. As the class continues their invasion-resistant strategies, the Admiral appends his most disturbing observation. Humans possess dangerous metacognitive awareness of their own evolutionary responses to existential threats. Juveniles are deliberately educated about adaptation mechanics we restrict to our highest echelons. Probability of successful standard conquest. Recalculating. Maya's voice cuts through his thoughts. The biggest mistake aliens could make, she tells her classmates confidently, would be giving us time to prepare after showing themselves. The Admiral stares at the child, suddenly understanding the true danger. They were already preparing, generations before first contact. The midday break period human educational institutions designate as recess begins with a piercing bell. Zextholian maintains his position on the school's roof edge, optical enhancers focused on the rectangular outdoor area, where juveniles engage in what his briefing materials identified as recreational activities. Preliminary assessment indicated non-strategic physical exercise. He notes into his recorder. Revised observation suggests significantly more complex behavioral patterns. The Admiral expected chaos, the natural state when immature organisms gather without strict supervision. Instead, he witnesses something that activates ancient military instincts evolved during the hive wars of his species' pre-unification era. It begins innocuously. Maya emerges from the building with 3 allies, 2 female and 1 male juvenile. They immediately conduct a surveillance sweep of the available territory. Communicating through subtle hand gestures, his combat pattern recognition software identifies as surprisingly sophisticated. They're employing basic squad reconnaissance tactics, Zextholian observes with growing discomfort. Another group approaches, 5 larger male juveniles. His threat assessment algorithms predict standard dominance behavior. The numerically superior force will displace the smaller group from desirable territory. Instead, Maya steps forward, engaging in verbal negotiation. His translator captures fragments. Alliance, mutual benefit, combined resources. Subject is proposing strategic cooperation rather than accepting hierarchical positioning. He notes, mandibles clicking rapidly. Behavior contradicts expected juvenile social development patterns. What unfolds over the next 23 minutes fundamentally alters the Admiral's conquest calculations. Without adult direction, 17 children spontaneously organize a territorial simulation spanning the entire playground. Using fallen sticks, they draw boundary lines representing sovereign regions. Wood chips become resource nodes. Ball-catching implements transform into technological advantages. Alliance structures emerge, dissolve, and reconfigure with fluid complexity. Zextholian activates his military analysis subroutines, sophisticated algorithms designed to identify battlefield strategy. The results send electromagnetic pulses of alarm through his nervous system. The children are employing 47 distinct tactical frameworks, including 3 advanced concepts the Hegemony War College only developed after centuries of formal study. Most concerning, he records, is their intuitive grasp of asymmetric advantage. Subject Maya's smaller coalition consistently negates numerical disadvantage through superior position selection and resource allocation. When a rival faction gains control of the elevated platform humans designate as Jungle Gym, conferring tactical high ground advantage. Maya's response proves most disturbing. Rather than direct confrontation, she initiates diplomatic outreach to previously neutral parties, forming a counter-alliance united against common threat. She identified the emerging hegemon and orchestrated multilateral opposition. Sextholian observes, standard galactic containment doctrine applied at juvenile recreation level. The recreation period concludes with Maya's improbable coalition achieving dominance despite initial position weakness. As the juveniles disperse at the signal bell, the Admiral captures Maya's conversation with her allies. "Next time, we'll control the swings from the beginning," she explains, gesturing to a strategic convergence point. "That way we can regulate access to the sandbox territory." "But they have more people," one ally objects. Maya's response chills the Admiral's hemolymph. "Numbers don't matter if we position correctly. Remember how we flanked them today. Next time will be even better." Sextholian remains motionless as the playground empties. His species matured in rigid hierarchical structures where position was determined by hatching order and maintained until death. Human juveniles casually reorganize their social structures based on strategic advantage, forming and breaking alliances with disturbing flexibility. "They're not playing," he whispers to his recorder. "They're rehearsing." That night, in the secure confines of his cloaked shuttle, the Admiral reviews footage of Maya drawing territorial maps in her notebook after returning home, meticulously analyzing the day's playground conflicts and annotating improved strategies. "Assessment update," he records grimly. "Human recreation mimics galactic conquest with instinctive accuracy. Their natural state is continuous adaptation rather than stability maintenance. Implications for standard pacification protocols: severely compromised." The seventh day of observation brings clear atmospheric conditions ideal for Maya's continued treehouse construction. Sextholian positions himself 20 meters from the primary activity zone, phase shifter operating at maximum efficiency. His exoskeleton still bears stress fractures from yesterday's emergency evasion when the family's domesticated canine detected his pheromone signature despite visual concealment. Subject has achieved 58% completion of elevated structure, he notes clinically. Current phase involves installation of primary support junction connecting vertical and horizontal load-bearing elements. Maya balances precariously on intersecting beams 3 meters above the ground. The Admiral's risk assessment algorithms calculate a 73% probability of structural failure given the material limitations and imprecise joining methodology. In hegemony construction projects, such probability would trigger immediate work cessation and material replacement. The prediction manifests with shocking suddenness. A support beam splinters with a sharp crack. The platform tilts at a severe angle. Maya attempts to regain balance, but momentum carries her sideways. As she falls, a jagged wooden stake from the fractured support penetrates her left forearm, emerging partially from the opposite side. Sextholian's combat reflexes activate before conscious thought. His forward appendages extend toward the falling child, phase shifter momentarily destabilizing from the rapid movement. Military discipline reasserts control microseconds before he reveals himself. Prime directive violation narrowly averted. He subvocalizes, shocked at his instinctive breach of observation protocols. Subject has sustained Category 3 physical trauma. The pool of red human blood spreading across weathered plywood triggers predatory impulses hardwired into his ancestral genetic memory. His species evolved as hemovores, biological programming still responding to the chemical signatures of wounded prey. The Admiral engages his hormone suppressors, forcing analytical functions to override instinctual responses. Maya's reaction defies all biological logic in his extensive xenobiological database. Rather than emitting distress vocalizations, the universal response to severe physical trauma across 73 documented species, she remains silent, her respiratory rate elevating only 11% above baseline. Instead of surrendering to incapacitating pain as any reasonable organism would, she methodically assesses her situation. Applying emergency protocols, Zextholian records with growing disquiet. Subject is implementing battlefield medicine without prior training. Maya uses her uninjured hand to remove the fabric covering her upper body, maintaining pressure around the wound site. With practiced movements that suggest either genetic memory or previous trauma experience, she fashions a tourniquet above the injury point, stabilizing the impaled wood rather than removing it, a technique that precisely matches hegemony field medic procedures for penetrating wounds. Only after securing the injury does she retrieve her communication device, activating it with blood-smeared fingers. "Mom, I need help," she states with disturbing calm. "I'm at the treehouse. My arm is hurt pretty bad. There's a piece of wood stuck in it. I've made a tourniquet with my t-shirt. It's not bleeding too much, but I need to go to the hospital." The Admiral's auditory processors detect only a slight elevation in vocal stress patterns, nowhere near proportionate to the severity of physical trauma. While awaiting assistance, Maya uses her functional limb to capture digital images of the structural failure point, methodically documenting the accident from multiple angles. "Need to reinforce this junction next time," she murmurs to herself. "Maybe metal brackets instead of just wood." Species paradox identified. Zextholian notes, his appendages trembling involuntarily. Subject experiences catastrophic failure, severe physical trauma, and significant blood loss, yet immediately begins planning improved methodology for subsequent attempt. At the medical facility, the Admiral observes through specialized remote drones as human medical practitioners insert metal stabilization devices directly into Maya's shattered bone structure. The procedure would incapacitate a hegemony warrior for no less than 30 cycles. His infiltration of the facility's information network reveals this marks Maya's fourth significant skeletal injury in 8 solar revolutions, each followed by complete functional recovery. Pain appears to be processed as information rather than deterrent, he records. Humans possess no natural armor, venom, or redundant physiological systems, yet behaviorally operate as if functionally immortal. Most concerning, subject categorizes potentially lethal injury as temporary setback rather than absolute limitation. Admiral Zextholian stands motionless in the command center of his cloaked vessel, compound eyes fixed on the swirling holographic displays surrounding him. The ship hovers in low Earth orbit, its advanced systems rendering it invisible to human detection technologies. After 14 consecutive observation cycles, the Admiral has temporarily withdrawn to process his accumulated data. "Computer, initialize conquest probability matrix," he commands, his voice reverberating in the metallic chamber. "Access xenobiological profile database, cross-reference with observational parameters from Subject 7294C, designation humans, with specific focus on juvenile specimen, Maya Rodriguez." The quantum computer acknowledges with a soft pulse of bioluminescent light, a system designed to communicate with the Admiral's specific optical receptors. His 4 primary appendages move across the control surfaces with practiced precision, uploading 14 days of meticulous observation data. "Analysis parameters," he continues. "Standard conquest protocols applied to current technological development level. Factor observed psychological traits as primary variables rather than secondary considerations." This command represents a significant deviation from hegemony military doctrine. For 17 successful planetary subjugations, technological assessment had formed the foundation of conquest strategies. Psychological profiling typically received minimal computational resources. Parameter adjustment noted, responds the artificial intelligence. Warning: non-standard analysis methodology may produce unreliable strategic projections. Override, Zextholian commands. Authorization Zextholian Prime 12 Delta. The ship's processing cores illuminate the chamber with pulsating energy as the quantum computer dedicates unprecedented resources to the simulation. Hours pass as the Admiral remains motionless, his exoskeleton locked in the hibernation posture of his species' ancient meditation practices. 73 hours later, significantly longer than typical conquest assessments, the results materialize as three-dimensional holographic projections. The images cause the Admiral's exoskeleton to pale from its normal iridescent blue to a ghostly white. Display primary conquest timeline. He orders, voice barely audible. The hologram expands, showing initial hegemony victories across major population centers. Human military resistance collapses within predicted parameters for the first 30 days. Then the simulation diverges dramatically from standard outcomes. By day 47, isolated human resistance cells begin utilizing captured hegemony technology. By day 84, human scientists have reverse-engineered basic weapon systems. By day 120, they have developed countermeasures that neutralize hegemony technological advantages in three critical domains. Impossible, whispers the Admiral. The simulation must be flawed. Negative, responds the AI. Psychological profile integration reveals unique species characteristics not previously encountered in conquest operations. Humans demonstrate unprecedented adaptation velocity when threatened. The projection continues its grim narrative. The simulation predicts humans would willingly sacrifice billions of their own to ensure long-term species survival. A psychological profile matching no other known intelligence, where other species inevitably reached a surrender threshold when casualties exceeded sustainable population levels. Humans demonstrated no statistical breaking point. Display post-subjugation scenarios. Zexfolian commands, his appendages trembling slightly. New projections materialize, showing generations of increasingly sophisticated human resistance movements. While all previously conquered species eventually accepted hegemony dominance, the simulation shows humans launching progressively more ingenious insurgencies across centuries, with surrender never emerging as a statistical probability. Explain deviation from standard conquest outcomes, the Admiral demands. The artificial intelligence responds with pulsing red glyphs. Species demonstrates unique convergence of psychological traits previously observed only in isolation: extreme adaptability, technological opportunism, unlimited pain tolerance, multi-generational vengeance commitment, and absence of hardwired submission response. The final analysis delivers its verdict in stark terms. Assessment: uncontainable by conventional means. Recommendation: immediate sterilization of planet or no contact. Zextholian stares at the extinction recommendation, his consciousness filled with images of Maya's determined face as she rebuilt her treehouse for the 8th time, her injured arm incorporated into a new construction methodology, rather than limiting her efforts. The simulation confirms my observations, he sub-vocalizes to his personal log. The threat isn't their current capabilities. It's their response to challenge. We would not be conquering a static civilization, but unleashing an evolutionary response we cannot predict or contain. Zexfolian returns to Earth with his perceptions fundamentally altered. The simulation results have transformed his scientific curiosity into strategic dread. He establishes his observation post in the familiar copse of trees overlooking the Rodriguez residence, optical enhancers focusing on the backyard construction site, where Maya's treehouse project has remained untouched during her medical recovery. Day 47 of observation, he records. Subject has undergone primitive medical intervention for severe tissue damage and bone restructuring. Expected convalescence period based on xenobiological comparison, minimum 60 days. The residence door opens. Maya emerges with her left arm encased in a rigid white protective covering. The medical restraint immobilizes the limb from fingertips to mid-upper arm, theoretically preventing functional use during healing. In any rational species, such an injury would terminate non-essential projects until complete recovery. Statistical probability of project continuation, below measurable threshold, the Admiral notes. Maya approaches the abandoned construction site with measured steps. Her expression displays what his emotional recognition software identifies as determination rather than the expected resignation. She studies the half-completed structure, head tilting slightly as she processes the engineering challenges. "Hello, old friend," she says to the wooden framework. "I'm back." Zexfolian's appendages twitch involuntarily. The child is addressing an inanimate object as a sentient entity, anthropomorphizing a construction project in a manner his species would classify as cognitive dysfunction. Yet her tone suggests not delusion but relationship, an emotional investment in creation itself. Over the next 4 hours, the Admiral observes with increasing disquiet as Maya systematically overcomes what should be insurmountable limitations. She recruits 2 juvenile allies from adjacent dwellings, demonstrating collaborative problem-solving. She repurposes household implements to serve as specialized tools, showing resource adaptability. Most disturbing, she incorporates her injury into modified construction techniques, treating the encased arm as a measuring device and stabilizing platform. Subject has transformed physical limitation into situational advantage, he notes with growing alarm. Behavioral pattern consistent with simulation predictions regarding human adaptation velocity. Against all statistical probability, Maya's project advances rapidly. The treehouse takes shape through collective effort guided by her singular vision. By the 40th day following her injury, 20 days before minimum expected recovery, the structure stands nearly complete. Zexfolian's analysis subroutines calculate that the engineering challenges overcome would qualify for mid-level certification at the Hegemony Technical Academy. The completed structure incorporates weatherproofing using repurposed polymer sheeting, low distribution innovations involving counterbalancing principles, and even primitive defensive features including retractable entry points and observation ports. On the 47th day, Maya hosts 5 other juveniles in her completed creation. The Admiral infiltrates their gathering using micro-surveillance drones disguised as indigenous flying insects. The children engage in a celebration ritual including nutritional resource sharing and animated discussion of future improvements. "This is just version 1, Maya explains, gesturing at the surrounding structure. "For version 2, I'm thinking we add a second level with a proper roof." Her companions respond with enthusiastic suggestions. One proposes a pulley system for transporting supplies. Another describes a water collection mechanism. A third sketches a solar energy capture device on a scrap of paper. Within minutes, they have collaboratively designed complex additions that incorporate principles of mechanical advantage, resource sustainability, and energy conversion. They instinctively build upon each other's ideas without competitive limitation, Zexfolian observes. Knowledge transfer occurs without hierarchical restriction. As darkness falls and her companions depart, Maya remains in her treehouse. She activates a small light source and retrieves her notebook. The Admiral's visual enhancers magnify the page to reveal detailed sketches labeled Moon-based design concepts. Zexfolian accesses Earth's information network, confirming that humans have barely reached their own satellite with primitive temporary expeditions. Yet here sits this child, confidently planning permanent extraterrestrial habitation, as if it were inevitable. "The danger," he subvocalizes to his recorder, his tone carrying the reverent fear of his species' ancient religious texts, "isn't what they are. It's what they cannot stop themselves from becoming." The grand chamber of the Hegemony High Council gleams with bioluminescent light, its crystalline architecture designed to intimidate through sheer scale. 12 matriarchs, their exoskeletons adorned with conquest medallions from 1,000 subjugated worlds, regard Admiral Zexfolian with compound eyes that reflect no emotion. His formal report, transmitted ahead of this mandatory appearance, has created unprecedented discord within the ruling caste. Admiral Zexfolian intones the supreme matriarch, her voice amplified by acoustic chambers evolved during the species' predatory past. "Explain your recommendation to classify Sol system as a prohibited contact zone." The Admiral stands rigidly at attention, conscious that his carapace shows stress fractures from 53 consecutive days without proper hibernation. The holographic data sphere hovering before him contains observation records meticulously compiled during his Earth mission. Honored matriarchs. He begins, standard evaluation protocols have proven inadequate for assessing species designation humans. Their current technological development suggests vulnerability to standard conquest methodology, but psychological profile analysis indicates unprecedented adaptive capacity when threatened. His primary appendage activates the holographic projector. Images of Maya fill the chamber, building, failing, bleeding, adapting, succeeding. The council members' mandibles click in what his experience interprets as dismissive irritation. "You would have us fear primitives who have barely reached their own moon," demands the Supreme Matriarch, rising to her full height, based on observations of a single juvenile specimen. Zextholian advances one step forward, a breach of protocol that sends ripples of agitation through the council. "I fear what they will become if we give them reason to unite against an external threat," he responds, his voice steady despite the career-ending implications of his defiance. This single juvenile demonstrates psychological traits our species spent millennia evolving beyond: relentless innovation, pain tolerance, resource maximization, and most dangerously, the inability to accept defeat as a final state. He activates the second data projection, the conquest simulation results. Our most advanced predictive engines calculate 78.3% probability that standard subjugation protocols would ultimately fail against humans, with catastrophic losses to hegemony forces. The council chamber erupts in competing vocalizations. Such statistics are unprecedented in the 17,000 cycles of hegemony expansion. The Supreme Matriarch restores order with a piercing harmonic that triggers ancestral submission responses. "You attribute extraordinary capabilities to a species that slaughters itself over primitive resource disputes and ideological differences," she states. "Their historical record demonstrates barbarism and self-destructive tendencies, not strategic brilliance." With respect, Supreme One. Zextholian counters. "Those very conflicts have accelerated their development. Each human war produced technological leaps that would require centuries of peaceful progression. Their disunity is their limitation, but external threat would immediately unify them." The Council deliberates in the high-frequency communication spectrum inaccessible to lower castes. Their decision, when delivered, is predictable. "Recommendation denied," announces the Supreme Matriarch. "Standard conquest preparations will commence immediately. You are relieved of command pending psychological evaluation." In his private chambers aboard the flagship, Zextholian makes the decision that will end his 3-century military career. His appendages move across secure communication arrays, bypassing command authorization protocols he helped design. To every military commander in the fleet, he transmits Maya's complete observational file with a simple message: "Watch this child. Understand what we face." The response comes faster than even he anticipated. Within 3 solar cycles, the invasion fleet reports critical system malfunctions requiring immediate return to the home galaxy for repairs. A coordinated mutiny disguised as technical failure. The Supreme Matriarch suspects treachery, but cannot prove it without revealing the unprecedented insubordination to the broader population. As the hegemony ships begin their withdrawal from Earth's stellar neighborhood, Zextholian activates his personal observation drone one final time. Through its sensors, he watches Maya standing in her completed treehouse, primitive telescopic device aimed at the night sky, where moments earlier his fleet's emergency translocation created a brief light anomaly. In her notebook, she sketches what she observed, adding it to her growing collection of astronomical irregularities. Beneath the drawing, she writes words that send a silent chill across light years to where the Admiral monitors the human communication network. "They're watching us. We should be ready." Zextholian terminates the connection, his decision validated beyond question. The strategic assessment no longer matters. The ethical calculation is clear. His civilization's safety depends on one imperative: humanity must never learn they are not alone until they find the stars on their own terms. because when they do, the galaxy will never be the same.